Welcome to another glorious episode of the Lunduke Hour. This episode is all about reviewing ArcaOS. It is the new version of OS 2. I had the main guy, the dude man from ArcaOS, the company behind ArcaOS, on the show just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that. And he was nice enough to give me a copy of ArcaOS. And being someone who used OS 2 back when OS 2 was actually being developed and sold, I figured I should really give it a run. You know, it's a closed operating system, but I got to give it a run. So I'm going to do a full review of that today. After I do the review, because this is a system that you can't download a trial version of for licensing reasons. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I feel like in order to decide whether or not you'd actually want to buy it, you'd have to see it in action. So I'm going to do a kind of a hands-on walkthrough of what it looks like, how it works, how it responds, what software is in it, what it does, all that sort of thing. And we'll do that after the review here. So all part of this video. So for those of you who are listening to the audio podcast, my Patreon supporters who get the audio version, the first part of the show will be great. The second part of the show is going to suck for you guys because it's going to be all visual. So I recommend maybe hopping over to YouTube to get the video version if you want to see what ArcaOS looks like in action. Now, this episode is brought to you, of course, by System 76 and Pogo Linux. And if you missed it, on Monday of this week, I did a review of the System 76 Oryx Pro laptop. It is killer, especially if you do media production work or hardcore gaming and need a hardcore gaming laptop. It's just fantastic for that. So I've been continuing to put it through its paces. You guys have given me a lot of suggestions for things you'd like me to try out, most of which are try this various distribution on it. So I'm trying to go through as many as I can. And on Thursday of this week, on Linux Thursday, I will go ahead and tell you basically the results of everything. So far, I haven't really thrown a Linux distro at it that's had problems. So stay tuned for that. This machine, though, I'll pick it up here briefly. It's a big, but not too big, but pretty big, massive gaming powerhouse of a machine. I mean, it's got a GTX 1070 with 8 gigs of RAM in it. At least this model does. You can get a slightly lesser GPU as an option in it, but man, the 1070 in here, it just screams. I mean, for a laptop, I know for a desktop, you can do more. You can get a couple of 1080s and SLI those suckers together, but for a laptop, man, it's hard to get much more gaming performance than this. Anyway, you can pick this up over at system76.com. System 76 is great because they support shows like this. They ship their systems with Linux right out of the gate. I love that. System76.com. All right, the review. Arca OS. So I guess to start with, I was an OS 2 user back in I want to say 1996, maybe 1997, maybe 1995 as well. And it was a great system. OS 2 was originally developed as a joint venture between both IBM and Microsoft. And they worked on it together. Things went badly. The two companies just did not get along. Eventually, they split ways. IBM took OS 2 with them, and Microsoft went the Windows NT route. Now, I first started really using OS 2 with OS 2 version 3, so Warp 3.0 is what they called it. And it was like a revelation. For me, at that point, I had seen modern Macintoshes at that point, which were still predominantly black and white, or at least the user interface was very grayscale. They hadn't introduced color to the user interface very, very dramatically yet. This was before macOS 8 even shipped. Many Macintoshes that were in schools and whatnot didn't multitask. I'd played around with a couple of friends' Amigas, but even though the Amigas had a lot of capability and they could do a lot of multimedia and graphics, and they were really, really amazing systems, the interface on them still looked very very 1980s. And Windows 3.1 was out, but which I'd used on top of DOS. I think DOS 5, I want to say, but it's Windows 3.1. I mean, it's not an amazing system by itself, right? I mean, it does certain things well, and it was popular for the time, and it was a nice windowing operating system, or really graphical shell, but it had a lot of problems. It had a lot of shortcomings. It was crazily unstable. It just really was. And so, in Linux, though Linux and Unix was great, Linux really didn't come into its own for a few years after that. A couple of years later, I got my first box copy of SUSE Linux, and then that sent me down the Linux track slowly but surely. But yeah, OS2, when it came out with Warp 3, it looked utilitarian but modern, at least for the time. The look and feel of it reminded me a lot of the common desktop environment of CDE, for those of you who are familiar with that, which a lot of the old Unix workstations shipped with, and there's variants of for Linux and whatnot. And it was a very versatile, good-looking system. But on top of that, and much more importantly than that, it was crazy fast, crazy stable, really resource efficient, and it ran not only OS2 command line applications and OS2 GUI applications, but it ran DOS applications wonderfully well, and it ran Windows 3.1 applications, and it ran them all simultaneously, all in a beautifully multitasking, super slick setup. It was really, really choice. It was so fast and so amazing. At that time, the machine I had, I'm trying to remember the exact specs here, was a 486 DX2 66. So it's a 66 megahertz 486 processor. I had 8 megs of RAM, something like that, something in that ballpark. And OS2 flew on this. It was an amazing machine. And the fact that I could run DOS, OS2, or Windows at that time software was just amazing. And that included games. So, like, if I wanted to play Doom under DOS, no problem. If I wanted to play Civilization 2 under Windows 3.1, no problem. They all ran at the same time. In fact, on that old 486, I ran, and this was back when I was in high school, right? So I was a teenager, and I had begged and pleaded my parents, all I wanted for my birthday or for any holiday was to get a phone line in my room. That's all I wanted. And I didn't need it to be able to call long distance. I wanted it to call BBSs, and I wanted it so that I could run my own BBS. I wanted that so badly. And so I ran my own dial-up BBS. I finally got that when I was in high school. And thanks, parents, for bringing me a phone line. And I ran a dial-up BBS in high school. I had a little external US robotics modem. Originally, it was just a 2400 baud modem, and then I got a newer 14.4 modem. And I had that hooked up via little COM port or serial port and to the 486 running OS2. And then inside of that, I ran a DOS version of a BBS package in a little window. And so it was a single line BBS. People could call and play games and Legend of the Red Dragon and Trade Wars and all these sorts of things. And they could call anytime, day or night, and play these games. So my machine was running 24/7 with people dialing in. And I could go sit down on this machine. And remember, this is a 66 megahertz machine with 8 megabytes of RAM, which is, and I think the hard drive was it was not a big hard drive. It was not a big hard drive. I mean, we're measuring in megabytes, not gigabytes here. And I could sit down while someone was logged into my BBS through my analog modem, log into the BBS locally and play games with them while having, Microsoft Word or whatever Office suite I was running at the time, which usually was Word back then, running in Windows 3.1 up off to the side, and behind it, a couple of text editors opened up, file browser going on, and everything, and just sitting there, stagnant version of Civilization 2 in the background for when I want to go back to that, all running at the same time. And yeah, you get all those things running, and on that old of a machine, it starts to slow down, but not much. It really handled the multitasking well. It was an amazing machine. So flash forward, IBM has abandoned OS2 essentially. They aren't providing updates to OS2. OS2 is dead. There was a effort to revive OS2 called Ecom Station, which I'm not really sure how much success that had. I reached out to the company that was making that a few times. It was like a version of OS2 with some little drivers, but I never really heard much from them. It was just kind of didn't really go in a lot of places. But then Arca Noe, a company that I talked to just a couple weeks back, they just released ArcaOS, and what they've done is they took OS2, which is a closed source operating system. There's no source available to this, and they have begun patching it. They replaced the bootloader entirely with something new that they wrote so that it can boot properly on modern hardware. That's pretty cool all by itself. They've also included a lot of drivers so that you have better driver support on more modern hardware. They've updated the networking stack so you have a more modern networking stack. And they've taken the time to basically patch the kernel. They literally binary patch the kernel. They have no source code for this, and yet they've reverse engineered the kernel with IBM's blessing, which is remarkable. And just to kind of update it, fix it, enable more features, that sort of thing, and more support for more amounts of RAM and whatnot. And now the result is you have this new version of OS2 that is able to run and support much more modern hardware. And they've also bundled it with a bunch of open source software as well, including a package manager that is RPM based, which is very, very cool. They've got their own package manager thing inside of the OS itself. So you can install, you've got Firefox, a version of Firefox. It's not the latest version, but it's not terribly old, and just a bunch of other stuff in there. A lot of shell utilities, so you can have SSH and everything else. Very, very cool. And I installed it in a virtual machine. Been kicking it around, playing with it, seeing what I could do with it, and I gotta say, I'm impressed. It's a really, really very adequate machine. It is clearly not a modern operating system, and I should clarify that it is not an operating system that is being top to bottom worked on in nowadays by a large team, and you can tell that by the look and feel of it. It feels like something from the 90s. It feels like, if any of you are Unix people or Linux people and you've used old Unix workstations, like an old SGI or an old Solaris box. It's modern. It's multitasking. It's stable. It's fast. It has all the features that you really need to do your work, but it has that old look to it. It has that old motif look to it. And that's really ArcaOS. It is incredibly fast and powerful. And, as I was using it, I decided to put it through its paces. I installed some DOS games, including Doom, because why not? Master of Orion, Master of Magic, the original Civilization, SimCity 2000, a bunch of DOS games. No problems with any of it. Worked great. Same with Windows 3.1 games or 3.11 games. I only installed a couple of them. I installed SimTower, because someone requested, will it run SimTower? Yes, it runs SimTower very well. And Civilization 2, because Civilization 2 was my favorite Windows 3.1 era game. I loved that game. So I installed that, ran great. No problems whatsoever. And I was really, really blown away by this. And it is just so fast, and it is so stable, and it is so smooth. It just doesn't hiccup. It just doesn't. And that is really impressive. realistically, from a usability standpoint, there is very little that current versions of Mac OS, Windows, or Linux offers that Arca OS does not. There's not really, in terms of like your system itself, right? I mean, I can hop on the internet, I can multitask like a dream. It's great. The downsides, you're not going to be able to use more than 32 bits of address space, which means you're not going to be able to use more than your 3 point something 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 gigabytes of RAM. Everything after that, I guess, can be put into a RAM disk, which is kind of cool. So if you have PAE, you can have a big RAM disk. So if you've got 16 gigs of RAM, you're only going to be using, a little less than 4 gigs of it as actual RAM, and then the rest of the 12 gigs is going to become a 12 gigabyte RAM disk, I think is how it works. I never really fully tested out the RAM disk thing because I didn't really have much need for it, but that's my understanding of how it works. And I think RAM disks are very cool, especially if you want something high performance and you don't want to be reading and writing from the drive all the time. So that's very cool. What really blows me away is how good of a retro gaming system ArcaOS is. And I know that's probably not what it was intended for. I know a lot of companies rely on ArcaOS for like manufacturing or financial institutions or things like that. They like the OS too, and they use that. And so this is a great transition to a more modern and supported system for them. That's great. I don't do any of that stuff. So for me, I was really looking at it from the point of view of a computer enthusiast kind of guy who just wants to play around with stuff. So I like playing old games. So DOS games, Windows 3.1 games, just perfect. It is a great system for DOS and Windows 3.1 retro emulation, basically. It is just incredibly nice to use, and I stop short of recommending it for someone who wants to use it for that purpose, simply because there's a price tag associated with it. I believe it's about, I think it's $99 or something like that for the personal edition, which is all you really need. But still, plopping down $100 for an operating system when you're running very old software does seem a little bit pricey for most people. It's great. It's totally great. But it isn't the original experience, because if you were running a Windows 3.1 game on just Windows 3.1, it's a different experience than if you run it under Arca OS or OS 2. It looks the same, the game plays the same and all that, but you're not running it with just Windows. It boots up into OS 2 and you have a different graphical experience. So the whole experience is different, but it does run great. And what I kept thinking about was, if it weren't for Linux, if Linux wasn't here, if I didn't have a Linux or FreeBSD or some other open source or free software operating system that already accomplished all of my needs, I would absolutely use Arca OS over Windows or Mac for my daily writing and web browsing. I absolutely would. If my only choices were closed source systems, I think I would go Arca OS, at least for like my putzing system, like my carry it around with me and just do some typing and browsing laptop. Arca OS. It's fast, it's small, it's light on its feet, it runs a lot of different kinds of software. Granted, much of it is very dated software, but just the same, I mean, you can grab a copy of Photoshop for Windows 3.1. I think the last version was Photoshop version 4, something like that. But it's still a very capable version of Photoshop. You can grab Microsoft Word and Excel, and you've got an actual Arca OS native versions of LibreOffice, Firefox. You've got all the shell terminal utilities. It really is a powerful system. I'm impressed at what this company has done. I don't foresee me continuing to use it because I have Linux, because I have much more powerful open source and free software systems. But if those weren't here, man, ArcaOS would be very tempting. It's a very interesting thing. I'd be curious. I know one or two of you at least have purchased this since watching the interview with the guy behind Arca. And I would be curious to know what your thoughts are, because that's been my experience so far. Is it really is pretty fantastic. Now, there were problems, specifically with Firefox. The version of Firefox that it ships with was really just not terribly stable in my experience. I managed to get it to crash 3 or 4 times. And Firefox can be a bit of an unstable beast to begin with, but it's really unstable in this version. It's totally usable. If I load up, one tab and go to a website, go to my webmail over at Collab Now, if I load up my my Nextcloud web interface and all that stuff, all worked perfectly, no problems. And it was a very usable thing. I was able to go to YouTube and play YouTube videos, but it was very slow. My guess is that's something to do with the graphics driver that I was using under VirtualBox. My assumption is that it would be faster if you were running it on native hardware or in a machine where you had better than like Visa graphics drivers, right? So I think that's the problem there. So web browsing and living online in ArcaOS is totally doable, but it's a little crashy. That was really my only complaint, was Firefox being crashy. Otherwise, it's more of the fact that there's just a little bit of a learning curve with using OS 2. Now, all that said, let's do a little hands-on thing where let's talk about OS 2 as we're using it. I'm going to show you OS 2 in all of its glory, and you can see what it's like to use OS 2, Arca OS, in the year 2017, like a decade more maybe after IBM just ditched OS 2 entirely. It's kind of interesting. And of course, this show is also brought to you by my other glorious sponsor, PogoLinux.com. In fact, watch the System 76 laptop. I'm going to turn that around. It's not System 76 we're talking about right now, though they are amazing. We're talking about PogoLinux.com. Now, if you want big racks of servers powered by Linux, you want big storage clusters powered by Linux, man, Pogo Linux are your guys. They also do VR development workstations. And if you go to, these are really fun to spec out. What I love about Pogo Linux's website, PogoLinux.com, if you go there, they have a bunch of subsections that you can look into. Servers and desktops and all that. They have a section under their workstations for VR development machines. And I like to go in there, and they have just drop downs so you can custom configure whatever machines you want, right? So you can say, I want, 4 GPUs of this particular kind. I want this specific kind of drives, these specific kind of RAM, this specific processor. Like, you could customize all of it. And it's really fun to daydream, because some of those VR development machines that they have are just so powerful. It's ridiculous. And they're just fun. It's fun to imagine having them. Anyway, PogoLinux.com, they're fantastic. I had them on the show a couple of weeks back just to talk about storage and stuff, because I'm not a storage expert and they are. So they do a lot of storage consulting for like big people who are handling huge amounts of data. So if you need any input on any of that stuff, or you just want to fiddle around and daydream about big workstations and VR workstations, PogoLinux.com. They're your guys. All right, let's dive into Arca OS hands-on. Welcome to Arca OS. All right, this is the base workstation. This is the desktop. This is what it looks like. Pretty straightforward. This is running at 800 by 600 right now. Nothing terribly fancy, because I don't have nice video drivers set up on this through this virtual machine, but it'll work for the moment. First thing you'll notice right off the bat, virtual desktops. That's kind of cool. So we've got virtual desktops. That works nicely. Down here, we've got your little process meter, so you can see how well your machine's doing, what your CPU load is like. We've got the equivalent of like a start button down here. And then up here, we've got our general desktop. Let's start at the very top. What happens when you double-click computer? Do you get a list of drives? No, you don't. You get all sorts of resources. So let's look at what we've got here. To start with, it actually looks kind of nice. I mean, it looks dated. It looks like an old Linux theme, like a GTK2 theme or an old KDE theme or something like that. But it looks nice. It doesn't look crummy. It just looks, a little bit dated, very 2D, which honestly kind of appeals to me. So let's pop open the command prompt section. First thing you're going to notice, lots and lots and lots of options for command prompts. You can do OS2 command prompts. Here we go. We'll pop this open right here. You've got OS2. We get a version, operating system 2, version 4.5. All right, cool. And then let's go DOS, a DOS session window here. What does it report? It still reports the same version, but this is the DOS window. So you can run your DOS commands in here. Does it have mem? Yep, there we go. So we've got a lot of memory associated with that. And then we can, of course, go with the Windows OS2 session in a window. And check this out. Boom. Notice how it just popped right open? Because it was already running. This is full Windows right here. So we can go like this. This is the entire Windows desktop basically running in a window as essentially an OS2 application is kind of what it's a lot like. This is pretty much, I left it kind of default and stock for these purposes. So this is kind of what you get when you install ArcaOS. So, but here's the experience of running this here. So let's open up something. Oh, let's Notepad. Where's Notepad at? There it is. The classic old Windows 3.1 Notepad. Boom, right here. Hello. And you've got a full, do I want to save those changes? No, I do not. All right, let's close this out for a minute. Yeah, I will end my WinOS2 session. That's totally fine. Let's double click it again. Bam, right up. Close it out. Yep, closes right away. That's just kind of neat. I mean, it's Windows 3.1. You don't expect it to be big and bloated and slow because it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. But the fact that it's there is really handy, despite its age and despite its antiquity and its relative lack of power. Windows 3.1 had a lot of software for it. So it's cool that you can be able to grab all of that right now. All right, and then of course we've got the drives. So we've got all of our drives here. This is what it looks like to browse the drives using the file manager inside of OS2, or in this case, ArcaOS. Pretty straightforward. It's just kind of this big hierarchical style. Pretty simple, really, and you can change the views a little bit to do different kinds of views and whatnot. But the hierarchical little tree structure is pretty much the common. Install and remove. So this is just for installing and removing various things, which includes the ArcaOS package manager, which you notice has a yum icon. Which is kind of cool. So it's downloading all the packages right now because I have a full internet connection. So let's see what packages are available using the ArcaOS package manager. Updating repository data. Cool. Thinking about it, crunching on it. And then we've just got a list. Here's the ones I've got installed currently. And here's just available ones. If you go down the list, you're going to find a lot of stuff there's ClamAV, FFmpeg, GCC. I mean, you're going to find the common things that you'd expect on a modern Linux desktop. A lot of them here, and that's really, really neat that you can just go grab those things. Especially funny that it's got a little icon that says yum on it. So that's just kind of groovy. All right, let's see. So selective install for the next thing. So you can do selective install stuff, install some device drivers. There's not a whole lot of unified software installation under OS2. Like there's no like software store. There's just a bunch of different ways to install things. We can go look at our printers. Nothing terribly fancy there because I don't have any printers hooked up. In fact, I don't even think I have any printers here that are currently working. No, I do. I have a Kodak upstairs. It's not worth it. I'm not going to try it out right now. Here's a startup folder. You want things to start up when you start your thing? Put it in here, and it'll start up when Arca starts. And then system setup. This is basically exactly what you would think it is. So like this is where you set all of your different mouse properties. You'll notice the colored tabs along the top. That was pretty common for OS2 applications to have their settings panels broken out into colored tabs, which is kind of neat. One thing, OS2 is a lot like old KDE. If you remember like KDE 3.5 and whatnot, the options that you'd have available were just seemingly unlimited. Like it just seemed like you open up a preference panel and oh my gosh, there's just preferences everywhere. And OS2 is a lot like that. You open up things and you're just going to find settings upon settings upon settings, and it just gets absolutely crazy. Oh, let's see what we can do with appearance here. So we can do, we can check our scheme palettes, and we can set different schemes and styles. You know, it's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, all of this is not too unusual, but it does look fairly nice considering its age. Same with icon themes. Ooh, hybrid. All right, well, maybe we won't do that at the moment, but that's kind of cool. So we can do different ones, different icon themes. Ooh, yes. This right here. Those, can I apply that? Can I apply that? Apply the theme Warp 3? Yes. Apply those themes. Selected themes have been applied. You'll need to reboot. I don't want to reboot. Let's go back and look at that for a second. But this is what it looked like when I was a youngin'. This is what OS2 looked like. This is what they all were like in Internet Folder there. Look at that. And then they got a little bit fancier, a little bit more isometric-y, and then this is the current Arca No Way style. Very, very cool, really. All right, and then the RAM disk. This is for setting and creating your own RAM disk, which honestly I think is a cool feature. Old Macintoshes had that a lot. If you had say 32 megs of RAM and you wanted to run a version of like Doom or something like that off of a RAM disk to try and increase your performance, you could say create a 12 meg RAM disk and move your entire game via drag and drop into the RAM disk and run it straight from RAM as if it were on a drive, which is just crazy fast. So OS2's got that in here as well, or Arca No Way. I gotta stop calling it OS2. Hardware Manager. Exactly what you'd think it was, except very nerdy looking. It's just your straight up hardware manager. And you can look at all the different pieces of hardware you've got on, start going around and managing some of your various device drivers and whatnot. All right, let's close this out. Let's actually close out this as well, and close out command prompts. Let's go look at some software now. Now we go over here, programs. It comes with some games. Klondike Solitaire, no device driver found. That's neat. And my guess is it's probably a video thing. Yeah, it still runs. Cool. So this is an old Klondike Solitaire game. Pretty straightforward. All right, let's move past that because that's not what we're here for. Installed software. Here we go. All right, so let's see. We've got Thunderbird, and yeah, that's a full version of Mozilla Thunderbird, so you can use your email that way, which is pretty rad. And then, you know what, let's load up Firefox, because this is kind of an important one. Double click on that. Firefox is probably the slowest application on here. Everything else just launches the second you start double clicking on it, and Mozilla Firefox is a little bit pokey. Well, this is embarrassing. It crashed. No kidding, it crashed. It just does that sometimes. Let's go to Lunduke.com. All right, so pretty straightforward. Works. Nothing too crazy. Let's see. What's a good place to go to? Let's go to reddit.com/r/Linux. So you go to Linux subreddit. It's going to render fine. You notice, I mean, the resolution's kind of low, so there's that against it. But realistically, it actually works just fine. I really was surprised at how well it worked overall. And specifically, it ships with, which version of Firefox is this here? 38.8. So, not the newest, but honestly, in my opinion, web browsers update too frequently, so I don't mind having a year or whatever old version of Firefox. That doesn't really bother me. All right, let's close these out because none of the rest of this stuff interests me. Load up the utilities. Now, here's something that's kind of cool. You can scan all your utilities. So what it's showing you here is not just your DOS utilities and your OS2 utilities, but your Windows utilities too. So like in this case, DOS editor, double click. Oh, that didn't work out. That just borked it. Let's exit that. All right. Well, when I clicked to start the DOS editor, it actually resized and ran my whole machine as if it were a DOS prompt, which is very fancy. But however, I was running in VirtualBox and it started moving the windows around and it screwed up the video editing. So we're back now. Let's just assume you know what DOS editor looks like. Let's go over here to the Windows 3.1 control panel, and then boom. And notice that it's a Windows 3.1 app, the control panel, running exactly alongside OS 2 applications, the presentation manager applications. That's what they call the applications in OS 2 that are GUI, the PM, presentation manager. Okay, well, that kind of blew everything up when I launched the DOS editor. The operating system handled it fine, but what it did is it actually resized my screen and went full screen in a DOS session, and then VirtualBox moved to a separate spot on my screen and got all wiggity-wackety. So let's just come on back here and not double-click on the one that says DOS edit, because it'll screw the video up. But let's see what we can do here from some of these other ones. If you load up the control panel, for instance, this control panel here is the Windows 3.1 control panel. So you can launch that directly from, the rest of your OS 2 sessions. It really treats Windows 3.1 apps, DOS apps, and OS 2 apps as if they're all equal citizens, and you can just use them interoperably. And that's really, really kind of neat. I mean, here's the old character map, that old friggin' character map, a stupid old character map, and it works just fine. And then here's an OS 2 text editor. And if you really want to go crazy, you can find like the version of Notepad for Windows 3.1 and run it at the same time. They offer basically the same functionality. But there you have it. This is pretty much what it is. Oh, you know what? Before we're done here, let's go down here and look at this. All right. The little ArcaOS button down at the bottom, the launcher style button. It literally is a mirror to what is on the desktop. So at the top, this is your desktop. And then all those icons we were clicking on up there, we can click on the basically menu-driven version of it. So whatever's in those is what we got right here. Pretty straightforward. And then we can lock the system, run commands, whatever we want to do. And when we say we want to run commands, we can tell it how to run it. For instance, if it's a Windows command, we can run it in enhanced mode. We can run it as a separate Windows session. That's kind of cool. Think about that for a second. So you can launch a separate Windows session to run it just in case of issues. You can start it minimized. You can make it full screen by default. You can close the window when you can change your working directories. OS 2 was really all about customizability in that way, and ArcaOS is really no different than that. Let's pull up these up. Yeah, so by default, it gives you, TFTP, Telnet, that sort of thing, all right in here. It's missing SSH by default, but you can grab that from the package manager. So that's pretty much it. This is ArcaOS. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. It's a really pretty straightforward system. I really do kind of like it. It's quality. It's not bad. I have nothing bad to say about it other than the fact that it's closed source. But that's not something the Arca folks really have much control over. That's all up to IBM. So anyway, this is ArcaOS. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I can address them later on in the week. But hopefully this was at least amusing, if not helpful to you all.